Our next speaker is Monte Shaw. He grew up on a corn and soybean farm in southwest Iowa town of Shenandoah. He has spent more than 13 years promoting the renewable fuels industry, the last 7+ years as executive director of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. Monte Shaw.
So anyway, let's see, where should we begin today? How about we look backwards at 2012? I don't know about you, but I'm glad that 2012 is in the rearview mirror. The drought of 2012 is going to be a touchstone that for all of us rural Iowans for the rest of our lives. I think going forward, we'll often refer to 2012 as a reference point when we're discussing the good years, the bad years, and that sort of thing. And the bottom line, 2012 was hot, dry, and horrible. The drought robbed our corn yields by 20% compared to the year prior, soybean yields by 16%. And while that's bad, I think that modern agronomic practices combined with the latest seed technologies really did prove their worth. While 2012 was bad, it was not, it could have been a lot worse. So let's just pray that we don't have to try to go through that again this year. Because the drought, it reduced production, higher prices, those things are going to have an impact on all users of corn and corn and soybeans. And like our Midwestern livestock friends, Iowa's ethanol and biodiesel producers had to make adjustments, some difficult adjustments to get through that. So while 2012 started out as average for ethanol and kind of bullish, quite frankly, for biodiesel, by the end of the year, both industries were cutting back on production. Iowa's 41 ethanol plants, you can see up there, produced about 3.7 billion gallons. We chewed up about a little over 1 billion bushels of corn, a large chunk of that corn, but it's very important to note, and I'm underlining and highlighting this now, that we don't just make ethanol in those plants, we make ethanol and high-protein livestock feed. We each need to do what we can to never stop reminding people that only the starch goes into ethanol, that all of that protein, all of that fiber, all that oil goes back out and is available to the feed markets. Now, Iowa has 12 biodiesel plants that can produce a little over 300 million gallons annually, but the lapse in the federal tax credit for biodiesel did hold the plants back, especially at the end of the year when the renewable fuel standard allotments had been satisfied. So we did have 10 plants running in 2012, and they produced 184 million gallons of biodiesel, which was a record in Iowa, and about 18% of U.S. U.S. biodiesel production, and that was great. But I really think with the tax credit back in place, and with the RFS number where it is for 2013, that we can expect another record year for biodiesel in 2013. So we're very excited about that. Now, folks, renewable fuels really power the Iowa economy and are making a difference. Every year at this summit, we release an annual updated economic impact study, and we're doing that again today. And what it shows is that you don't have to look at all these little numbers, but Iowa's ethanol and biodiesel producers spend about $11 billion on inputs, mostly from Iowa. And as a result of that, and how that rolls over in the economy, the ethanol and biodiesel producers accounted for about $5.5 billion of Iowa's GDP, or about 4% of the economy. That's a pretty good chunk. And it also put about $4 billion additional dollars of income into the pockets of Iowa families. That's mostly in rural Iowa. And it supports both directly and indirectly throughout the economy about, not quite, but just about 60,000 jobs. So we're really excited about that. And that is an industry that is worth fighting for. So we're not going to just sit back and be dictated to by those who benefit from trapping consumers into higher fuel prices from limited options. That is not going to happen. I can assure you today that the Iowa renewable fuels industry is ready for the fight ahead. We know that big oil has more money they took from your pockets, by the way, but we have the facts, and we're ready to fight for those choices at the pump that are clean, cheaper, and homegrown. So there's only one question. Are you guys going to stand and fight with us? And I think that you being here today on a day like this shows that you will, so we appreciate that. Now, together we can uphold the facts, the truth. We can beat back the lies, the nonsense, and the jealousy. And I think Iowa will stand together, because renewable fuels are not just important to Iowa plants, the producers. They're important to all of Iowa. And that is why IRFA recently helped form the Iowa RFS Coalition. This coalition is dedicated to one thing: preserving and protecting the federal renewable fuel standard. On behalf of the IRFA board, you can see the members of it up there. It's growing almost every day. On behalf of the IRFA board, I would like to thank the members of the Iowa RFS Coalition for stepping up to join the fight, and we're excited to see that coalition continue to grow. Now make no mistake, there is no shortage of jealousy out there or nonsense or even flat out lying about renewable fuels. In fact, we could dedicate this whole summit to simply trying to respond to all of the absolutely outrageous anti-renewable fuel statements made during the last 12 months. But to do so would be to do what they want. They want us on the defensive, and that is not going to happen. So I'm going to poke a few holes in a couple of my favorite ones of these lies, but then we are going to move forward and talk about what we want to talk about. So let's go to baseless attack number 1. Renewable fuels raise food prices and starve the world's poor. Now, according to the updated food chart, let's see, what do we have it over here? If you can't see it, this little bitty piece over here, which is just over 11 cents of that dollar, is what farmers get out of your food. All the rest of it goes elsewhere. And only about 3 cents of that 11 cents goes to corn. So the fact is, corn prices can make a pretty big move, and yet it really doesn't impact the consumer because it's such a small portion of what that dollar is they're spending. And if you look at that chart, what you see is that energy, you got processing, that's energy. You got packaging, plastic, comes from oil. You've got transportation, oil. You've got energy for refrigeration, oil and other fossil fuels. So really what's driving the price of food is energy. It's not the price of the commodities. So let's go through some food and fuel fun facts, I call them, and I should give credit to RFA's Jeff Cooper, who's excellent at pulling these things out. Number 1, ethanol plants produce an amazing amount of animal feed. More tons of distillers' grains are produced each and every year than tons of feed are fed to every cow in every feedlot in America on a ton basis. That's why we export the stuff. We can't feed them 100% in the ration anyway, but we produce more. If you could feed 100% distillers, we could feed every cow and every cattle and every feedlot in the United States, and we'd still have to export distillers. Number 2, when it comes to the production of nutritious animal feed, let's do a little quiz here. Who produces more? U.S. ethanol plants or the entire U.S. soybean crush industry combined? U.S. ethanol plants now produce more tons of animal feed than all of our crush facilities in the United States. I don't say that in any way to minimize the role that soybean meal plays in our feed. It's absolutely important, but just think of the scale of what we've become on the renewable fuel side. Number 3, the RFS was enacted in 2005. So, well, what have we been doing with food price inflation? Look at that. Food price inflation is lower since the RFS was enacted than in the 25 years before it. Wow, we're really hurting those food prices, aren't we? And then people say, well, wait a minute. You expanded it in 2007. So let's look at 2007 and see where we're at. Well, since 2007, energy food price inflation has been 3 times the rate of energy price inflation has been 3 times the rate of food price inflation. Go back to that dollar chart on the food, and you can see what's driving the food costs. And they say, well, okay, but the drought, 2012 drought, that just had to nail it. Well, the recent numbers I found that I could get my hands on were for the 12 months ending in October 2010. During that 12 months period, which was the heart of the drought leading up to that harvest, food price inflation 1.7%, energy inflation 4%, more than double. So you can kind of see what's driving this thing. Let's look on a broader scale. U.S. ethanol producers use just 2.9% of the world grain supply, and yet somehow we're supposed to control the prices of all the world's food, even including rice and wheat, which are food staples around the world, and yet we just control a little bitty bit of the market and use a little bit of the market. I mean, how does that make sense? It doesn't pass the sniff test. And finally, world farmers, and Rick alluded to this, are responding to higher grain prices and production, and rural and ag production and rural incomes throughout the world are up. As Rick mentioned, last year in Ethiopia, the poster child for world starvation actually produced enough grain to establish a formalized grain trade. Something like 70% of the world's poor live in rural areas and derive their living from agriculture. And today, with grain prices reflecting the market value and not the artificially low value due to the Farm Bill programs, we're actually giving the world's poor a true chance to better their economic lot. And in fact, as it says up here on the screen, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization has said, quote, investment in bioenergy could spark much needed investment in agriculture and transport infrastructure in rural areas, and by creating jobs and boosting household incomes could alleviate poverty and food insecurity. The facts are clear. Biofuels do not hurt the world's poor, and in fact, may actually be one of the best tools for creating a better future for the world's poor and hungry. And that's the message we need to get out there. Baseless attack number 2. All livestock producers hate the RFS. Now, certainly it is a goal of the national livestock groups, most of them, and their allies in big oil to convince the DC policymakers that this is true, but it simply is not. And you have to look no further than the recently adopted position on renewable fuels by our very own Iowa Cattlemen Association. A little over a month ago in December at their state convention, they adopted this resolution. Whereas the production of renewable fuels and their co-products in the state of Iowa is beneficial to the Iowa cattle industry, therefore be it resolved, the Iowa Cattlemen's Association support renewable fuels production and legislation that promotes growth in renewable energy, etc. That is a pretty strong statement, and on behalf of our industry, I just want to thank the Iowa cattlemen for standing with us and standing up for that against some of the out-of-state large guys. So make no mistake, I don't think Iowa cattlemen took that position just because they sat back and said, well, ethanol and biodiesel are good for Iowa, so we should support it. They took that position because ethanol and biodiesel have been good for Iowa cattlemen. When U.S. farm programs encouraged overproduction of corn, the price of corn hovered around $2. Okay, you can't read this. What this is a chart that shows that from 1981 to 2005, except for 3 years, the cost of production of corn was above, the average cost was above the average price a farmer got paid for that. Think about that. In all but 3 years out of 25 years, a farmer got paid less for his corn than it cost him to produce it. How is that sustainable? Well, we had a multi-billion-dollar farm bill. So so his competitor is buying $2 corn, but he's feeding $2.60 corn to his cow. He's in a severe disadvantage. That gave the Texas cattlemen, who only bought the corn, who did not grow the corn, a decided advantage over the farmer feeder model that was common in Iowa. And so now with renewable fuels, we've boosted that price of corn back above the cost of production, and now the Iowa farmer feeder model has the economic advantage over that large out-of-state corporate feedlot. And that's good. Now, it's good for us. If you're a cattleman in Texas, or you raise hogs in North Carolina, or maybe you raise millions of chickens, they've been active recently, millions of chickens in Arkansas, you're probably not happy about this change. You kind of like that $2 corn. And you had a really good 25-year run based on subsidized corn. So they're upset, I understand that. But how do you think Iowa livestock producers and Iowa farmers felt during those 25 years where we were on the short end of the stick? We've returned to a time where the price of corn is set by the market, not a government policy. We're not going to go back, and those guys are just going to have to adapt and deal with it. Now, today's prices for corn and soybeans are better for farmers, are better for taxpayers, and are better for the environment. Yes, I did say the environment. That brings me to baseless attack number 3. Renewable fuels and higher corn prices cause farmers to rape the land and ruin the environment. Now, I grew up on a farm in the 1980s in southwest Iowa, so this attack just really chaps my hide. It really does. I get pretty upset about this one. The environmentalist wacko line of reasoning is that high corn prices incent farmers to grow fence row to fence row, chopping down trees, plowing under virgin prairie grass, and to hell with grassy waterways, buffer strips, or other land stewardship tools. This attack reveals such ignorance of Iowa farmers that I'm pretty sure the environmentalists who make these claims probably don't know which end of the cow to put the distiller's grains in. Come on, that's pretty good, guys. Come on. Are we out there? Those coffee cups were too small? All right. All right. Now, worse than simply shoving aside the facts and the statistics, this attack essentially calls Iowa farmers both stupid and morally corrupt. So I kind of take offense to that. But let me tell you something. What leads to poor land stewardship is not rural prosperity, it's rural desperation. That's something I witnessed firsthand in the 1980s. When the low price of corn pushes a farmer to the brink, they have no money to invest in new equipment for reduced tillage practices or new terraces or maybe that cost-share wetland project with the NRCS they'd like to do. When a farm that's been in a family for 100 to 150 years is on the edge, yeah, that farmer might plant pretty darn close to that creek, and he's certainly going to plant that boggy corner of the field in the desperate hope that just a few more bushels of corn might be enough to keep the banker at bay. We all in this room, I think, know farmers who lost their land in the 1980s. I remember as a kid the ads for suicide hotlines for farmers. So to argue that farmers don't care about the land or don't want to hand it down to the next generation in good shape is just plain wrong. And those who attack farmers, they may be able to go take a picture here, find an anecdote there. Not everybody's perfect, but they don't know the heart of the Iowa farmer. And I'm not here to say farmers are perfect. I stole this out of an ag magazine. If one of the reporters here, it's yours, I'm sorry. But, you know, we're not perfect. We haven't always made the right decisions, and sometimes we can be a little slow to change, but change we do. Consider the environmental improvements that farmers have achieved since 1980. There's a chart up here from the National Corn Growers. Land use per bushel down 30%, soil loss down 67%, energy use per bushel down 43%, greenhouse gas emissions per bushel down 36%. Those are great environmental practice improvements. Those are things we can be proud about, things we need to talk about, and those improvements are coming even faster today because of renewable fuels. We're producing more livestock closer to where we grow the crops. So instead of having that manure problem in those other states that they don't know what to do with it, we have a highly valuable organic fertilizer to take right back onto the very fields from where the cattle feed originated. And here's the other one. I just love this number for my friends that don't like farmers. In 2000, before the first modern dry mill ethanol plant was built in Iowa, we had just under, let me stress that word, just under 1.6 million acres enrolled in CRP. And that year, Iowa produced about 440 million gallons of ethanol. Fast forward to 2011, the last year they have the CRP data out for, Iowa had just over 1.6 million acres in CRP, and we produced 3.7 billion gallons of ethanol that year. More acres in CRP and astronomically more renewable fuels production. That is a great testament to the Iowa farmer, and those are the statistics. Now, so they said these high corn prices were going to have an impact, and they did, but it wasn't the impact the environmentalists claim where we lost CRP acres. Just the other way around, farmers have taken that higher income, they've invested it back into their operation. Simply put, they don't feel the economic pressure to plant right up to that creek or to plant that boggy corner of the field. They have income to improve their farm for the next generation. We took a survey of farmers invested in the ethanol plants and said, hey, since the RFS went in effect in 2005 and we've seen the farm income go up, what have you done with that extra money? 63% bought precision farming equipment. 61% have instituted conservation practices since that year, like strip tilling, no-tilling, things like that. And an amazing 71% have installed environmental protections like grassy waterways, buffer strips, and wetlands. You can't drive down a highway in Iowa without seeing the NRCS, wetland signs. We're investing that money. It takes money to do those things. And I think it's clear to me, and to anyone willing to look, that renewable fuels and the higher corn and soybean prices have led to an era of some of the best land steward practices that we've ever had. But big oil and their allies aren't going to stop attacking, and they're not going to stop attacking just with the feedstocks. They're also going to attack the fuel. I don't have time today to rebut the numerous flat-out lies told about E15 that I would like to, but that'd take about 5 hours. But you should stay around for the panel this afternoon where they are going to address some of those on the E15 panel. I really want to do that. But speaking of other whoppers that Big Oil's told, I think we all need to mark down January 8th, 2013 on our calendars. It's a day that should live in tax policy infamy. During his annual State of the Energy Industry address, the head of the American Petroleum Institute tried to claim that oil receives no subsidies. Now, I don't want to put words in his mouth, so let me quote. Quote, the oil and gas industry gets no subsidies, zero, nothing. He went on to say, quote, what we get are cost recovery measures. Scout's honor. Right there. Yeah, Scout's honor. Cost recovery measures. Wow, I'm glad he cleared that up, aren't you? Now, API President Jack Gerard actually has a long and respected career in D.C. It's not an attack on him. He's led many large trade associations, and I'm pretty sure he gets a pretty nice paycheck from the American Petroleum Institute. But even so, I almost, not quite, but almost feel sorry for him because his bosses at the big oil companies, they so desperately want to attack anything that renewable fuels get in public policy, whether it's a tax credit or a program, and they want to attack that and then believe that big oil is above the fray. They want their lackeys in Congress to believe that big oil is not mandated or subsidized. So out comes poor Jack, and he has to say, no, we don't get billions in subsidies unique to the oil industry. Things like Oh, I'll just read through some of these. Percentage depletion allowance, marginal oil well incentives, enhanced oil recovery credits, intangible drilling cost expensing, deduction for tertiary injectants, I'm sure that's pretty important, exceptions from limitations, and blah, 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 blah. You can read them up there on the screen. These guys get billions. But no, Gerard had to come out and say no subsidies. Despite the fact that one of the few things these two guys agreed to during the last presidential campaign was that oil subsidies needed to be cut back. Despite the fact that the House Ways and Means Committee chairman, a Republican from Michigan, said oil subsidies need to be on the table when we look at how to balance the budget. Despite the fact that the very people drilling the wells will go out, like Western Capital Energy Development on their website, will state the risk capital is effectively subsidized by the government. They're probably an API member. Despite that, Investopedia.com, and that's where I go for all my advice, says no other investment category in America can compete with the smorgasbord of tax breaks that are available to the oil and gas industry. And get this is my favorite one. Despite the fact that even the American Petroleum Institute's own website, and I just pulled this off on Sunday, so I know it's still there, their own website states that oil companies have had these types of things since the inception of the tax code, 1913. Ouch. I mean, that's a hard sell. That's a hard sell. I'm sorry I'm getting a lot of feedback here. So Jack, you know, you can put lipstick on a pig and you can call it a cost recovery measure, but it's still a subsidy. What's the fact? Fact. Big Oil's longest continuous tax subsidy dates back to, as they said, the inception of the modern tax code in 1913. So this year, 2013, we are celebrating a century of subsidies for Big Oil. Get out the candles and a fire extinguisher. Now, many editorial boards love to question anything that ethanol and biodiesel get, so I challenge them to do the same with oil. Are 100 years of subsidies to Big Oil enough? When will Big Oil be able to stand on its own 2 feet without a taxpayer crutch? I think those are questions we all need to be asking. Now, there's one other Big Oil fact I want you to know about, one that you need to share, and that is that I don't think most people realize this, the federal government mandates that you buy petroleum-based gasoline. For nearly 40 years, federal government law, is what we refer to as the federal petroleum mandate, dictates a certain minimum percentage of petroleum in any fuel you put in your car. When it was first went into law, it was 100% petroleum. That was the only fuel they approved. Now we've got an E10 in there, we've got an E15 in there, so today the minimum, federal minimum is 85%. But if unless you drive an FFV, if you're one of the proud 5% like me that drives a flexible fuel vehicle like this Buick over here, you can get around this. But for the other 95% of Americans, every gallon of gasoline you buy is at least 85% petroleum mandated by federal law, or you're breaking the law. And let me tell you something, that federal petroleum mandate is backed up by some pretty big teeth. Now let me just explain this. Let's say I'm driving down the road and I see a blender pump over here that offers E30 and E85 for those flexible fuel vehicles. But I'm not driving a flexible vehicle. But I look over there and I see the E30 is 30 cents a gallon cheaper. Hey, that looks pretty good. And I remember reading about studies in South Dakota and Minnesota that said E30 worked just fine in the cars up there. So let's say I decide to take personal responsibility for my fuel and I put E30 in my 1999 Chevy truck. Now, in case anyone from the EPA is listening or will watch this later, I want to stress that this is a purely hypothetical situation. I would never do such a thing like this and admit it publicly. So if the EPA caught me doing that, putting that E30 in my truck, they have the federal petroleum mandate gives the EPA the power to fine me $25,000 a day each and every day that fuel stayed in my fuel tank. $25,000. That's pretty big teeth, folks. So never mind that the E30 was cheaper. Never mind that I was willing to take responsibility for the result. You can't do it. That's a federal mandate, folks. I don't care. Now, I should tell you, just theoretically, it worked fine. Truck ran fine. Although, I must admit that Big Oil's come out with a recent study that says this damage to my bumper was caused by the E30. Now, I'd love to discuss with you today the other things they get, the unfair benefits to petroleum they enjoy, the exclusive access they have to master limited partnerships, federal loan guarantees for pipelines, the power of their fuel distribution monopoly, and many other things, but we don't have time. So let's cut to the chase. Next time someone comes to you and wants to talk about renewable fuels and uses words like level playing field or mandate or subsidy, do not get defensive. Do not apologize. Go on the offensive. Federal policy is completely tilted in the favor of big oil. The fact is, renewable fuels would love to compete on a level playing field where consumers have access to our fuels. We're cleaner, we're cheaper, we're better, we would do just fine. Unfortunately, that's not the world. We have to remember that big oil does have a century of subsidies and nearly 40 years of a federal petroleum mandate. So what should we do? What can we do? We should start by protecting the renewable fuel standard from the assault by big oil. In the face of their mandate and their subsidies, the RFS is the best tool we have to help open doors for ethanol and biodiesel. And make no mistake about it, 2013 is going to be a battle royal over the RFS. It's going to be make or break for the petroleum companies to keep their virtual monopoly over your fuel choices. And you might say, why is that? Well, in 2013, an obligated party under the RFS, just think big oil for shorthand, can comply with the standard through the sale of E10 and these credits they've got in their little piggy bank from selling additional renewable fuels in prior years. But in 2014, if all we have out in the marketplace is E10, they don't have enough credits left in their piggy bank to comply with that standard. So they would be forced in 2014 to have no choice but to accommodate the demand for more biodiesel and higher ethanol blends like E15. They'd have to give up that monopoly. So each and every one of us needs to ask our elected representatives in D.C. to do all they can, more than ever before, to fight for the truth about the RFS. The RFS cracks open that federal petroleum mandate. The RFS promotes consumer choice at the pump. Quite frankly, the RFS brings market forces into the fuel sector, more market forces into the fuel sector, not less. So do not apologize. Stand for the truth. Now next, Congress should also provide some mid-range certainty to the less mature and emerging segments of the renewable fuels industry. In the face of the continued billions each year for petroleum, Congress needs to enact a multi-year extension of the federal biodiesel tax credit and cellulosic tax credit. Wait a minute, sorry, I call them tax credits. I meant cost recovery measures. We need to get those cost recovery measures out there for our fuels as well. And Congress should allow renewable fuels access to the same tools that petroleum already has, like master limited partnerships. Let's actually level that playing field. Now here in Iowa, and I am getting close to wrapping up, here in Iowa, the focus needs to be on that consumer access. We need to get more renewable fuel options out there, and particularly higher blends, like B10 and E15. In 2011, the year that the data is most recently available for, biodiesel blends accounted for 1/3 of all diesel sales in Iowa, and the average blend was roughly B5. That's pretty good, but we can do more. Almost all diesel engine manufacturers now endorse up to B20. You see that on the Ford symbol there, up to B20 in their equipment. So we need to continue expanding the blending access and the retail locations, but we also need to start moving consumers toward the benefits of higher biodiesel blends. IRFA has joined with other stakeholders, and you can see the website there, other stakeholders to form a More Beef for Me campaign designed to get consumers to buy higher blends of biodiesel. Now, farmers in the audience, I got to tell you, write this down, www.morebeefforme.com, and sign up. Go there. You can learn more about the program, learn more about why you should choose biodiesel, and put your name in the hat to win $1,000 in free biodiesel. Iowa Soybean Association is working on that with some other groups and all of us. So anyway, you might not want to do that. I think you can also sign up today at the REG booth in the trade show if you're a farmer and want to buy some, want to put your chance in there for some biodiesel. Now on the ethanol side, it's the same story. We need higher ethanol blends. E15 or 15% ethanol, they're the next step forward. While only a small amount more ethanol from your engine's perspective, E15 represents the opportunity to boost ethanol demand by 50% from a production perspective. That's more than 6 billion gallons of additional potential demand nationwide. Now, let's be honest, we're not going to change national ethanol demand by selling E15 in Iowa very much. But we can change national ethanol demand by selling E15 in Iowa and proving that to retailers and consumers that it is a preferred fuel choice. We need to lead the way in Iowa. We have the most at stake. We need to export an E15 retailing success story so that Iowa can help unlock the additional market demand that E15 represents. And let me tell you, at the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, we hear that from all of the plants, all of the associations, all over the country. They want Iowa to be the tip of that spear. They're counting on Iowa to be the tip of that spear. So what can Iowa do to boost things like blends like B10 and E15, given their importance to our future economic growth? The answer, I think, is to give a boost to the consumers who make those choices. In Iowa, not all fuels are taxed the same. Tax policy is just that, policy. Fuel tax policy is no different. Today we tax E10 differently than E0. We tax airplane fuel differently than diesel fuel. Now, Iowa does not suck one hydrocarbon out of the ground. We produce renewable fuels. So when the Iowa legislature debates fuel tax policy this year, IRFA will be there. Such a debate is not just about taxes, it is about fuel policy. And today, IRFA is calling on the Iowa legislature and Governor Branstad to include a B10 or E15 tax differential in any legislation that changes the Iowa fuel taxes. This type of differential is applied directly at the pump, straight to the consumer, and short of an actual requirement, has proven to be the single most effective incentive out there. We've got a once-in-a-30-year opportunity to focus Iowa's fuels policy on the next generation of fuels, those higher blends, E15 and B10. We can't afford to miss it. So stop out at our booth. You've heard about the postcards there. You can send to your state rep, your state senator. We can't afford to miss this chance. Now, relative to other states, the last 5 or 6 years have been good for Iowa. And renewable fuels have played a major role in that. But we're not satisfied. We want to do better. And for renewable fuels, that means cracking the petroleum mandate with the RFS. It means leveling the playing field for petroleum's century of subsidies so biodiesel and next-generation fuels can compete. And it means moving the needle here in Iowa on higher blends like B10 and E15. Now, none of this is out of reach, but it's not going to happen on your own. It's not going to be one of these Iowa field of dreams, build it and big oil will come. We're going to have to look back a decade from now and decide that 2013 was a watershed year. It was the year we fought and got these things and we moved forward, or it was the year big oil turned us back. So I think we're going to have to fight for our future. I ask you to join me in committing to fight for that future. And for renewable fuels in 2013, this is going to be a watershed year. And with that, I just ask for your continued support. We've got to get the job done. Thank you for being here. And we'll move on. Thank you.